What's new, crew? If you're new, my name is Cassandra. We are doing one of the last really big bulk harvest days of the season with some fresh things here heading out of our garden, and then here you're going to watch us process a bunch of apples and pears that came from my grandma's homestead. She just has so many that she just needs help taking care of some of these and getting rid of some of them, and I was more than happy to take them. So my husband was home this day. This was a Saturday. He operated one apple peeler, peeled a ton of stuff. The kids took turns coming up on our second apple peeler, and we kind of worked in shifts with the kids and peeled a bunch of stuff. But you can see we pulled out all of our equipment here, all of our crock pots, our roasters. Earlier in the morning I went ahead and started sorting a huge thing of tomatoes that we had and washing tomatoes and peppers because I was going to be making some sloppy joe sauce while my husband and some of the kids peeled apples and pears, and we got those cooking down. The total plan for this day was to make applesauce out of this big roaster pan here, to make a crock pot full of apple butter, and to make a bunch of sloppy joe mix here. So all I did for the sloppy joe mix was take 2 pots because I didn't have one pot big enough for it, threw it full of onions and tomatoes and peppers, let that cook down until it was nice and soft, and then I hit it with my immersion blender to make a big batch of basically tomato sauce that was seasoned with our onions and our peppers. Once I got that smooth and it was more juiced, I wanted to dump the 2 pots into one of my big canners because I wanted the recipe to taste the same. I didn't want to have to do 2 different recipes, especially when I'm water bath canning. I want to make sure that it's safe, and I didn't want to put, too much vinegar in one and not enough vinegar in the other. So I just dumped it into my big canner and dumped in the rest of the ingredients for this sloppy joe mix. I will have this sloppy joe recipe linked down below for you if you are also interested in making some sloppy joe sauce. Right, you can see here I actually just dropped the entire thing of brown sugar and my measuring spoon into this huge pot. In hindsight, I should have just used my jar lifter to pull this out because it was super hot and I tried to lift it with my fingers. But don't worry, we get it out. It's not that big of a deal. And then I went ahead and finished adding in all of my other spices and seasonings that I needed. This recipe was a lot different than a lot of other recipes that I had looked up, but this is the one that I thought made the most sense for me, so that's why I chose this one specifically. I also have this tomato paste in the fridge from a recipe I did recently. I'm going to throw this in here. This is just going to help it thicken a little bit faster. I'll have this recipe linked down below, but I chose this one specifically because it says it pairs really well with beef and venison, so we'll be able to use some of our ground venison with this too. So hopefully that tastes pretty good. Most of the recipes I looked at call for ketchup. This one doesn't. So I don't know, we'll see how this goes, but if I need to, I might add another can of tomato paste. I have a couple of these on hand, but I'm just gonna let this kind of cook down and see what it does on its own before I start shoving a bunch of stuff in here. While this and my apples are cooking down, I'm gonna start making the syrup for our apples in syrup here. The good old manual here, but in this book it has a recipe for apples in syrup, and it also has a recipe for apple pie filling. I'm just gonna do the apples in syrup because it's a lot simpler of a recipe. It doesn't call for anything special, just the apples, water, and sugar, and that just seems a lot more straightforward to me. It says that you can use both for pies and desserts and things, so why add more steps and put more things into a jar if I don't have to? That's kind of my thinking. So I need to make an ultra light or an extra light syrup for this. So I'm going to go to page 140 of this book and follow the instructions for the light syrup, and then whatever apples I have left in my big tote full of water and lemon juice, I'm going to pack those into jars so I can pour the syrup over and get those processing while my applesauce, my apple butter, and then my sloppy joe mix continues to cook down. The sloppy joe mix does taste a lot better now that it's cooked down a little bit. The vinegar kind of got worked in. The tomato paste really helped thicken it up. It's already reduced by about 1/2 inch or so, so I'm just gonna keep letting that go while we get everything else going and start getting some things knocked off the list here. So I need 5 cups of water and half a cup of white sugar. In my pot here, I'm not gonna make a big batch of syrup because I don't have a ton of apples left, so I've never done this before, so I have no idea what the quantities are gonna look like for syrup for jars.
While my sloppy Joe mix continued to kind of cook down, I went ahead and got our syrup ready for our apples, and like I said, it is just water and sugar. And I kind of made an oopsie daisy here because, well, you'll see in a second, I suppose, but while my syrup started cooking down, I decided this is a good time to go ahead and get my apple crisp going. So I just took apples out of our bucket here. These are the apples that were left over that we didn't put in the roaster for our applesauce or in the crock pot for our apple butter. And I knew that out of these apples, I wanted to make an apple crisp, and I wanted to use the rest of the apples for apples to can in the syrup for things like baked oatmeals or cookies. Sometimes we like to throw apples in the crock pot with some pork products. So there are a couple different variations that we like to use canned apples for, mostly desserts, but in some savory things too. So all I did was fill up my tray here with apples. All I did here was fill up my little pan with apples. I sprinkle cinnamon and just a little bit of sugar on top because we are putting sugar in the crisp, but white sugar on top of the apples with a little bit of lemon juice. I almost forgot that here, but then I remembered. Gotta grab your lemon juice because that's what Grandma says, and Grandma can't be wrong because she's been making pies for like 60, 70 years. So I'm gonna trust her. Grabbed my bowl here for our apple crisp topping, and apple crisp toppings are super easy, or crisp toppings in general. All you need is a cup of brown sugar, a cup of oats, a cup of flour. Mix that together with a cup of butter, and you have a crumble topping for streusels or crumb cakes, kind of like whatever you want to use this for. But this is awesome if you're like me and you suck at making pie crusts. You can still have a pie sort of thing and a crumble topping. It's delicious. And I've almost learned to like the apple crisp better because with the brown sugar, it makes it almost like a caramel topping. It just tastes really good. But throw out your cup of everything in your bowl. We're going to give that a good mix and just spread that over the top of your apple crisp. And I also end up making homemade whipped cream on this day. Whipped cream is the easiest thing in the world to make, and it is always something that impresses people. All you have to do is take a little bit of heavy cream, put that in your KitchenAid or with your hand mixer, and you're gonna whip it until it starts to look like whipped cream. Add in a splash of vanilla and a little bit of sugar, and it tastes like a whipped vanilla ice cream. It is so superior to anything you're gonna buy in the store. It is delicious. I made a big batch of it this day, and we topped it with our apple crisp, and then since then I've been using it to top my coffee with, or some of the kids' hot chocolates, because the temperature dropped here. It went from 90 degrees one day to literally like 40 degrees overnight. So here is our apple crisp. As you can see, it did not last long. I had some people already digging into it because it's that good, but here it is with our homemade whipped topping, and we had that for lunch. So we ended up taking a little bit of a break for lunch, got things settled, and our sloppy Joe mix was ready to go. I let it cook down. You can see there it actually cooked down about 2 inches, which is really good. It became thick, a little bit thicker. It's definitely still a sauce, but it tastes delicious. So here I am. I'm just giving it another little bit of a stir here, making sure that everything is the way that we actually want it to be. And this is where I made a mistake. I actually went ahead and packed all my jars, and my husband was with me in the kitchen this day, and he goes, I don't think that's right. I'm pretty sure you have to bake these in the syrup. And I went, are you sure? Reread the recipe. Yep, you got to bake them in the syrup, or you have to simmer them in the syrup for 5 minutes. And it's actually a good thing that this happened, because there's no way one batch of syrup would have been enough. So I ended up putting this back on the stove with my apples and making another batch of syrup. And then while that was cooking down, I packed my jars with our sloppy Joe mix here, and my counters look crazy. And this day, you guys, my kitchen was a disaster. There was so much going on, there was so much equipment everywhere, and sometimes when you're batch canning a lot of different things in a small area, that's kind of just the way it is. It's not always like you see on like Instagram reels or Pinterest or anything like that, where everything's clean and orderly and it just seems so peaceful. Sometimes it's really stressful, and this was kind of one of those times. So I ended up getting all of my sloppy joe mix loaded in jars and in the canner, and then while those were on the canner, I got my apples here loaded up and poured in with the syrup here, and then I got these loaded into the canner. And this is where I'm really happy I have 2 canners now, because this made my day so much easier. You can see my KitchenAid going there. It has my whipped cream in there for our apple topping. Went ahead, just started pulling things out as they were ready, and then we took a really big break because all of the active canning was done, and I was just waiting for our apple butter to cook down and for our applesauce to cook down. And it was really nice because we were able to play outside and take a little bit of a break before we hop back into the...
So this is my apple butter. It's looking fantastic. I added in everything I needed to add in here. I doubled this recipe, but it's 2 cups brown sugar, 1 cup of vinegar, and a tablespoon of cinnamon, a half teaspoon of clove. I added no clove to this, that's just personal preference, but like I said, I doubled this. So everything that times 2. I do still have to hit this with my immersion blender, but I'm gonna let this kind of simmer in here for about 2 hours before I hit it with my immersion blender. It is currently, let's see what time it is. It's like 4:30. I'm making supper right now as well. We're gonna do a gnocchi soup, but I'm gonna let this cook down until the kids go to bed, and then I'll ladle this into jars probably right as they're getting ready to head to bed. And Joe will help me process all of these. I'll get the water bath canners back up on the stove. I took a minute to kind of clean out my kitchen a little bit, wash my dishes. Supper's going now. As you can see, the apple crisp is almost gone. It was fantastic with the homemade whipped cream that I did. Delicious. Here is our roaster pan. I am learning, I don't like the way the roaster pan cooks versus the way the crock pot does. So I think next time I do this, I'll just put it all in my crock pot, which is lesson learned. It's just taking a long time to cook down, and it's sticking a lot more to the roaster pan than it did in the crock pot. So there's a little bit more babysitting here, and it's just not quite as far along, but that could also be because there's a lot more product in here. This is going to be our applesauce. I will sweeten this with a little bit of sugar probably. I guess we'll see how it tastes once it gets cooked down, because this is a mixture of apples and pears in here, so it might be sweet enough, but if it's not, I'll add a little bit of sugar. We're gonna have clearance Walmart bread with our gnocchi soup tonight. So we've got the onions and the carrots cooking down. I have my handy dandy Instant Pot out, and I've got my chicken in here, and then we'll shred it once it comes out of here.
So this is where me and my husband really tag teamed things, because we kind of bounced back and forth between loading things in jars, wiping rims, getting lids on, and the kids. So the kids played outside, like we were in and out all day in between doing canning projects. Me and my husband were taking turns. One of us would be in the kitchen manning whatever was happening, and then the other one was outside with the kids, and then we would switch. So the kids were really dirty because they were playing in the dirt all day. So while he helped bathe some of the older kids, I loaded these into jars and wiped some rims, and then you're gonna see a big cut in the footage after the apple butter. And then I went ahead and took the baby and took care of the baby and got the baby like cleaned and in jammies and fed and all that good stuff, while he loaded in all of the applesauce. So I took care of the apple butter. As you can see, that the jars are really hot, and I was having trouble with this jar for whatever reason, but I loaded everything into our jars, and this apple butter, you guys, is phenomenal, and I'm really happy because this is a ton of apple butter. Apple butter is not like our go-to toast topping, I would not say. I think our go-to is more of like a berry jam, but these are really nice just to mix it up sometimes. So this is a long time of apple butter for us, but I got that loaded into the canner, and then just kind of cleaned up a little bit so that I could get my applesauce up on the counter and get my apple butter out of the way so we could move on to the next step of processing, which was our applesauce. And this is where my husband stepped in and he loaded all the applesauce into jars and wiped the rims and started getting lids and rings on them while I took care of Cleo. And then by the time I got back into the kitchen, it was pretty much ready just to put the applesauce in the canner and can the applesauce. And then we were done for the day and we closed shop at like 9:15 at night. The kitchen was a mess. I left it a mess and I took care of it the next day. And that's kind of all she wrote for this really long, like 12-hour preservation day.
Here's a really quick look at all of the jars that we did today. There are just shy of 30 jars here. This is our sloppy joe mix and then our apples and syrup here. Very excited about the apples and syrup. I think those will be really great in both baked oatmeals and different desserts that we do throughout the winter. And I won't have to peel as many apples this time. It'll be nice to just pop a jar. And then we got 17 pints of our sloppy joe mix, which is amazing. That is plenty. We definitely will not go through that in a year. So I'm hoping that this is 2 years worth of sloppy joe mix and it tastes really good. I did add some chili powder to it just because it was a little bit sweeter than what we like, but it was still very tasty. It just wasn't quite where we like it. So I left it like this and I'm hoping that in the future I will learn how to pressure can and then I can just make my meat and can my ground meat and my sloppy joe mix together and have like pre-made meals up on the shelf. That would be fantastic. So always learning, always improving, but this is fantastic. This is the most jars I've done in one day and I could not have done it without my husband and my kids helping process apples, peeling apples. While they peeled the apples, I went ahead and got all of the sloppy joes mixture up on the stove and started getting that cooking down. We all worked very well together today and I love that. I'm very excited and happy that everybody got in the kitchen and helped out today, got to learn some new skills and just a lot of really fun family time. So lots of jars for the shelf, super happy about this. And the fun's not over because we still have 22 quarts of applesauce and probably, I don't even know how many pints we'll get out of our crock pot. Hopefully 10 or 12, that would be amazing, but we'll see what happens. So many jars happening today, lots of applesauce, lots of sloppy joe mix, lots of apples and some light syrup. It's a really good day. I'm very happy with the progress that we were able to accomplish today.